Our State of the U.S. stories tonight. The latest economic report is out. And despite liberal claims that President Trump was going to crash the economy, GDP grew by 3.2% in the first quarter of 2019. That's huge. Even the Washington Post was encouraged by the report, saying that it, quote, smashed expectations. Analysts say the growth was due to companies beefing up their inventories and a smaller trade deficit. And while I'm sure Democrats are happy that their pocketbooks are growing, it must sting a little, since they predicted President Trump's election would lead to another depression. Instead, the economy is growing at an unprecedented rate. With me now to discuss, Chief Economist and Vice President of the Center for State Fiscal Reform at the American Legislative Exchange Council, Jonathan Williams. Jonathan, thanks for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me back.
Of course. Jonathan, tell me why this number, the 3.2% GDP growth, why it differs so much from the expectations, the predicted 2.3 to 2.5% growth.
Well, these are really great numbers, obviously, and this is really a great story for the American economy, for the men and women, hardworking Americans across the economy that are making this happen. And as you mentioned in the opening, we were told that President Trump would crash the economy, that we would not see 2.5 or 3% GDP growth again. And thanks to so many of the good policies coming from Washington in terms of tax cuts and regulatory relief, and of course we see the states taking a lead on growing their economies and building into this number. This is something that I think America needs to be proud of, and let's hope that this continues. I think it will, given where these numbers came in relative to expectations. And by the way, these numbers would be much higher if it weren't for the partial government shutdown earlier this year. That could have bumped it up into the upper threes or perhaps 4% GDP growth, which people had told us for a long time was not possible again for the American economy.
Well, the Democrats told us it was not possible, that's for sure. President Trump said that it was possible, he would do it. That government shutdown, I think a lot of economists were interested in what the first quarter GDP was going to be, because that shutdown was the longest in history. It was 35 days, and I believe at least 25 of the days were this year. The other few were at the end of last year, of course. But what confidence, why didn't economists have confidence that it would be as good as it is? Why did they lowball their prediction to something as low as 2.3?
Well, I think they lowballed it, and they've been lowballing the economy for several years now. Those CBO projections and even the Federal Reserve projections going into the 2016 presidential election projected, 1.5, 2%, a little over 2% GDP growth. They did not see the resiliency of the American economy and the hardworking men and women that have made this happen. And let's not forget, this is the largest tax reform under President Trump and Congress that we had seen in 31 long years. And now we are back on an equal playing field with the rest of the developed world with our business taxes, the regulatory relief, and great things are happening. You look at the NFIB numbers and looking at confidence of small businesses, which, by the way, those are the ones adopting all of the new hires. Really, when you look at the net new hires across the country, they're coming from small businesses, and their confidence is at all-time record levels. They have a very, very tiny percent of their employees that are looking to perhaps have job losses. I mean, this is the lowest in NFIB survey history that they would be looking at job losses for small businesses. That's why I'm confident going forward, based on regulatory relief and tax reform, this economy, even though it's an old bull market, we've seen this long recovery now, I think it still has some juice left to it.
Right, and I mean, I certainly hope so. You would think this would be an issue that would excite people on both sides of the aisle, that we would, people on both sides of the aisle would celebrate this because it's good for the American people. You'd think politicians would do that. Instead, this is the sort of the trajectory, the evolution of the Democrats' talking points regarding Trump and the economy. So Democrats in 2016 warned us that Trump was going to start another Great Depression. This was going to be the worst that we've ever seen, where our children are not going to have the same economic life that we had. In 2017, of course, when the Depression didn't happen, they say, well, the economy is good, of course, if you look at the numbers, but we all know this was just left over from President Obama's. This was Obama's, this is credit to Obama, not Trump. Of course, it wasn't, because it continued. So Democrats in 2018 said, well, 3% growth is good, but of course it won't last. This is a temporary bump due to the Trump tax cuts, but it won't last. In 2019, what's going to be the next iteration of this? When does it hit home that they were wrong in 2016, wrong in 2017, wrong in 2018, and Trump was right all along?
Well, it's now several years in the making, and we've had quarter after quarter of very good results with a couple of just blips in the radar. And so as long as I think we keep the trajectory going of the expectations that tax relief is going to be permanent, as people are filing their taxes, they were told that their tax would go up for the middle class, and of course that didn't happen when people went and filed their taxes. And when the businesses have continued incentive to hire here in the United States versus hiring elsewhere across the world, these are great incentives that should be long-term and long-lasting. And let's face it, these are the times when Republicans and Democrats should come together and celebrate this strong economy, regardless of partisan affiliation. This is something to be happy about, and we should all be proud as Americans.
Right. Amen to that. Amen to that. I'm not sure that that sentiment has quite penetrated the United States Congress yet. This is always, from a political standpoint, looking at this, I always think situations like this are a good time to see the true colors of a politician, because if a politician is in Congress for the right reason, they are going to be happy that good things are happening for the American people. They're going to be happy about record low unemployment rates. They're going to be happy about wage increases. They're going to be happy that our GDP is growing at 3.2%. All of these things are good for their constituents, and that should, if someone's heart is in the right place, if their motivation is properly aligned, they're going to be happy about that. So if we look at what politicians are ignoring this, or what politicians are scoffing at this, or discounting this, or trying to distance this success from Trump, that shows you that they're not there for the right reason. That shows their true colors, and this is the perfect time, I think, to analyze that.
Well, you know, I couldn't agree more that people need to be intellectually honest with themselves and see the positive stories coming from Washington. But also, let's not forget about the positive stories coming from so many state economies that are getting it right. We just released our new Rich States, Poor States report, going through states like Texas and Florida and Arizona. States that are following the free market framework are helping to build this economy. And when states do well, guess what? The federal economy does well. And as long as we have these 50 laboratories of democracy, like we do in the 50 states that we follow every day, we're seeing some amazing pro-taxpayer stories come out of those states and their decision-making, protecting taxpayers across the board.
Yep. Like I said, amen to that. Jonathan, thanks so much for being on the show. It was great to talk to you. On that note, we're going to